My brother stood up at our Christmas dinner table, clinked his crystal wine glass, and announced, with a smug smile, that our parents had secretly given him the company I built from the ground up. He looked me dead in the eye, San Francisco's city lights shimmering through the penthouse windows behind him, and said I was officially relieved of my duties and that I would be leaving with absolutely nothing. "Thanks for looking after my new toy for so long, Madison," he sneered, his voice dripping with unearned authority. "But as of right now, you are officially fired." Welcome to Turning Tables Stories channel. I'm sitting here enjoying a quiet cup of coffee and taking in the view. It's a stark contrast to the storm Madison just faced at her own dinner table. Before we see how she fights back, tell me, where are you watching from and what are you drinking right now? Now, let's head back to that silent penthouse. I did not cry. I did not ask why. I did not even flinch, as the words "officially relieved of your duties" hung in the air like the stale scent of overcooked turkey. Anger was not loud this time. It was clinical. I simply reached for my glass, swirling the $400 Cabernet I had paid for, and took a slow, methodical sip. The wine was rich, heavy, and tasted like absolute victory. I set the glass back down on its silk coaster with a deliberate click and turned my head slowly toward my father, Thomas. He sat there, at the head of the table, playing the role of the powerful patriarch who had just orchestrated the masterstroke of the century. "Should I tell them now, Thomas?" I asked, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly steady, "or do you want to do the honors?" The entire penthouse went dead silent. Thomas let out a harsh bark of laughter that echoed off the high ceilings. He looked at me like I was a toddler throwing a tantrum in a grocery store, not the woman who had kept his lifestyle afloat for the last decade. To him, I was never a daughter, I was just a highly performing asset. My compassion had been a luxury they had overdrafted for years, and now the account was closed. Joshua's wife, Kayla, leaned forward, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light of the chandelier. She let out a soft, condescending laugh. "Oh, Madison, you really should listen to them," she cooed, her voice dripping with fake, saccharine sympathy. "It is honestly pathetic to watch you try to act tough when you are a single woman with zero leverage." She looked me up and down, her eyes full of pure, unadulterated pity. "Let us be brutally honest. You are 34 years old and completely alone. You have no husband, no children, and frankly, you have developed such a rigid and masculine energy that it is no wonder you can't keep a man." Joshua smirked, leaning back in his chair like a king on a cheap throne. "I already have an interior designer coming in on Tuesday morning, Madison," he announced, tapping his silver fork aggressively against the mahogany table. "That corner office of yours has always been so incredibly drab and lifeless. It needs a complete overhaul now that a real executive is moving in. We are thinking rich mahogany wood accents, leather seating, and a custom wet bar in the corner for actual gentlemen." He reached into his tailored suit jacket, one he definitely could not afford on his own, and tossed a thick legal envelope onto the table right next to the gravy boat. "So, what is it going to be?" Joshua asked, his tone turning sharp and demanding. "Are you going to hand over your company laptop and the office keys right now, or do we have to make a massive scene on Monday morning? Because I promise you, I have absolutely zero problem having my private security team carry your cardboard boxes out to the parking lot in front of your former employees." My mother, Kimberly, nodded vigorously, pouring herself another generous glass of wine. "We are doing this for your own good, sweetheart," she chimed in, her jewelry clinking as she moved. "You should be grateful we let you play businesswoman this long." Play businesswoman. The words hung in the air over the roasted turkey like a foul, toxic odor. I had sacrificed my entire youth for that company. While Joshua was bouncing from one failed startup to another, running back to mom and dad to bail him out of his terrible financial decisions, I was building an absolute fortress of wealth from nothing but pure, sheer determination. I had worked 90-hour weeks, skipped every vacation, and even slept on a freezing concrete warehouse floor to ensure our inventory did not freeze when the heating broke. I turned Apex Frontier into a machine that generated $30 million in annual revenue. And my own mother reduced all that blood and sweat to a little girl playing in a sandbox. I looked at Thomas. 5 years ago, he co-signed a $100,000 loan to get me started because I had no credit history. He treated that signature like he was handing me the keys to the kingdom, but he conveniently forgot that I paid back every single penny of that loan within the first 2 years. I paid the astronomical interest. I paid the fees. He even forced me to pay 12% interest, double the market rate to, as he put it, teach me the true cost of capital. Meanwhile, he bought Joshua a luxury vehicle outright after he totaled his last one. Joshua never had to pay back a cent. He was the golden son, carrying the family legacy, while I was just the workhorse, expected to pull the heavy plow through the mud, while he paraded around wearing blue ribbons he never earned. This is the trap of normalized cruelty. I realize now that my family had successfully dehumanized me. In their eyes, I was not a daughter with feelings or needs. I was a financial utility. They had created a psychological cage where my brilliance was only welcomed if it served their greed. My mother would constantly pull me aside and tell me not to talk about my staggering profit margins because it might make Joshua feel insecure. I was expected to continuously shrink myself to make him look taller. They did not see my sacrifice because they had normalized the idea that my only value was what I could provide for them. I was the designated draft horse, while Thomas took all the credit for my hard work at his exclusive country club dinners. But the horse had stopped pulling, and the carriage was about to hit a wall. I slowly reached down beside my chair and picked up my leather tote bag. I unzipped the top compartment and pulled out my tablet. The polished screen reflected the warm glow of the dining room chandelier. I did not rush. I took my time wiping a small smudge off the glass before entering my passcode. I tapped the mail icon and scrolled until I found a very specific message. It was a company-wide memo I had sent exactly 3 weeks ago. I placed the tablet flat on the table and spun the screen around, so it was facing Joshua perfectly. "Read it," I said softly. Joshua rolled his eyes, leaning forward with an exaggerated sigh, as if I were wasting his incredibly valuable time. He began to read the email out loud, his voice starting off flat, but quickly growing increasingly amused. It was my announcement to the entire staff that I would no longer be serving in the capacity of Chief Executive Officer for Apex Frontier. Joshua stopped reading and let out a loud, booming laugh. He threw his head back and laughed so hard his face turned slightly red. Kayla joined in, a wide, genuine smile spreading across her perfectly contoured face. "Are you actually serious?" Joshua asked breathlessly, pointing at the screen. "You sent this 3 weeks ago. You already quit." My mother clapped her hands together, looking absolutely delighted. "Oh, Madison, that is wonderful news. See, Thomas, I told you she would eventually see reason. She knew she was in over her head and just bowed out gracefully. I am actually very proud of you for recognizing your own limitations." Joshua was still laughing, shaking his head in disbelief. "I cannot believe you tried to play it cool. You saw the lawyers sniffing around, and you tucked your tail between your legs and resigned to save face. I let them have their moment. I let them bathe in their false victory. It is a rare and beautiful thing to watch arrogant people construct an entire reality based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the facts. They thought my email was a white flag. They thought I had abandoned the castle. Because I saw their little army approaching over the hill, I reached out and gently pulled the tablet back toward me, shutting off the screen. "I did not resign, Joshua," I said, my voice steady and clear, cutting through the lingering tension. "I simply relocated my assets." Joshua's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. A tiny flicker of confusion crossed his face. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his tone suddenly defensive. "You just showed me the email. You stepped down. You admitted it right there in writing." "Yes, I did," I replied calmly, "but you clearly do not understand what that actually means for your immediate financial future." I watched Joshua stare at me with a blank expression. He had spent his entire adult life trying to get rich quick with internet schemes, but he knew absolutely nothing about actual corporate law. My father was equally uneducated in this specific arena. He thought owning 51% of a piece of paper made him an untouchable business tycoon. They both severely underestimated how much I had learned in the last 10 years of swimming with actual corporate sharks. "Let me give you a free business lesson, Joshua," I said, keeping my voice low and conversational. A limited liability company is essentially just a legal container. It holds whatever assets and liabilities you choose to put inside it. 5 years ago, when I first started Apex Frontier, I put everything into that specific container: the warehouse lease, the equipment, the payroll, and eventually the lucrative client contracts. That is the specific container our father co-signed the original loan for. That is the container he legally owned 51% of. And that is the container you just proudly transferred into your own name today. Joshua scoffed heavily, but I could see the confusion starting to curdle into something else. 6 months ago, I continued, I realized that my proprietary 3D architecture algorithms, the actual technology that makes my work so incredibly valuable, was legally vulnerable. I saw this exact family takeover coming from a mile away, so I hired a premier corporate law firm to completely restructure my entire operation from the ground up. I did not just step down from Apex Frontier. I legally established a brand new entity, a Delaware corporation called Apex Global. I watched Thomas drop his silver fork. It hit his porcelain dinner plate with a loud, sharp clatter. And over the last 6 months, I have been very busy methodically emptying out the old container, I said, my tone dangerously light. I legally transferred all of the intellectual property, including the custom routing software I coded from scratch, directly over to the new corporation. Since I was the sole creator, that transfer was perfectly legal and completely airtight. My father demanded to know what I was saying, his voice suddenly stripped of its booming patriarchal confidence. I looked at him and smiled. I am saying that my new corporation owns the technology, but I certainly did not stop there. Every single one of my major vendor contracts expired at the end of the third quarter. I simply chose not to renew them under the old company. Instead, I renegotiated and signed brand new, multi-year contracts under Apex Global, my new corporation, the one I own 100% of, the one your lawyers have absolutely zero legal claim to. And I didn't just move the contracts, Joshua, I moved the people. My entire senior engineering team and the IT department, the only ones who actually hold the encryption keys to your servers, signed their new offers with Apex Global months ago. You aren't just left with an empty building, you are left with a tomb that no one left knows how to operate. Joshua swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his expensive silk tie. He looked over at Thomas, who was suddenly intensely interested in the intricate wood grain of the mahogany table. But Joshua was not ready to surrender. His ego had always been his absolute biggest blind spot. He puffed out his chest, trying desperately to sound authoritative, despite the cold sweat breaking out on his forehead. "You are lying," he stammered. "You cannot just take the clients and run away. Besides, the company still has massive physical assets. I have been to the industrial park, Madison. I have walked through that 50,000 square foot facility. I know we own the entire fleet of vehicles. I know we own the massive high-tech equipment on the floor. You cannot fit a building into a new corporate filing. Those physical assets belong to the company I now control. You are just trying to scare me into handing it back." I smiled slowly, leaning back in my dining chair, with genuine cold amusement. "You are absolutely right, Joshua," I said, keeping my voice perfectly even and calm. "The company you now control still holds every single one of those physical assets. You own the exclusive right to use the facility. You own the right to operate the fleet. You own the expensive machines." Joshua let out a loud, dramatic breath of relief, looking over at Kayla with a triumphant grin. "See," he said to his wife, She is just bluffing us. We have the entire infrastructure in place. Kayla did not smile back at him. She was staring directly at me, waiting for the other shoe to drop. She knew I was nowhere near done. Yes, you have the infrastructure, I agreed, reaching down into my heavy leather tote bag one more time. But you see, Joshua, physical assets in a massive design and manufacturing empire do not just exist in a vacuum. They come with corresponding massive financial obligations. I pulled out a thick, heavy manila folder. It was stuffed to the brim with official-looking documents, heavily stamped with red, urgent ink. I tossed it casually onto the center of the table, right next to his precious corporate transfer documents. It landed with a heavy, loud thud that made Kimberly flinch. "Go ahead," I offered, gesturing toward the overstuffed folder. "Open it. Take a good long look at your shiny new empire." Joshua hesitated, his manicured hand hovering over the folder for a few seconds before he finally flipped the heavy cardboard cover open. The very first page was a final legal notice from the commercial real estate conglomerate that owned the warehouse property. "That 50,000 square foot facility you mentioned," I said casually, taking another sip of my dark red wine. "It is not owned by the company. It is leased. And that expensive commercial lease is up for its mandatory renewal on the 1st of next month. Because the old company just lost all of its major clients, the corporate landlord is demanding a massive security deposit of $400,000 just to renew the contract." Joshua flipped rapidly to the next page, his hands physically beginning to shake. "And those automated sorting machines you were just bragging about," I continued, my voice ringing clear through the silent room. "They require mandatory annual maintenance and strict software licensing fees, which are completely due next week. I should also mention the cost for structural simulation compliance, a safety protocol Thomas personally instructed me to ignore for 2 years to pad his own pockets. Now that he's out and you're the CEO, the inspectors are demanding immediate payment and a full audit. Add in the crushing fleet vehicle insurance premiums, the commercial liability coverage, and the deferred state business taxes from the previous quarter I listed with lethal precision." Thomas finally spoke up, his voice incredibly tight and strained. "How much, Madison? Exactly how much is owed?" I looked right at my father and delivered the exact brutal number. $2,400,000, I said, "and every single penny of it is due within the next 14 days. The color completely drained from Joshua's face, leaving him looking physically ill. He stared blankly at the stack of invoices, the tax documents, and the commercial lease renewals. $2.4 million, he whispered, his voice cracking horribly. "The company does not have that kind of cash lying around. That's because I legally swept the accounts to settle the outstanding IP licensing fees owed to my new corporation. And since you no longer have the contracts or the technology to generate that $30 million in revenue, no bank on earth will lend you a single cent. You have all of the overhead and zero of the income." Joshua looked up at me, pure, unadulterated panic swimming in his eyes. This is the reality of what I call the illusion of power from an empty wallet. Joshua thought that a title and a corner office made him a leader, but he forgot that, in business, you are only as strong as the capital you control. He was so obsessed with having the company that he never bothered to understand what being the owner actually required. He wanted the prestige of the crown, but he was too lazy to notice that the treasury was empty, and the creditors were at the gate. "We will just declare bankruptcy then," Joshua stammered, searching for an escape. "We will dissolve the company tomorrow morning." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, and gave him a terrible, predatory smile. "You cannot do that, Joshua. Did you even bother to read the secondary DocuSign link I sent you alongside the transfer papers? You were so desperate to show Father you were in control that you signed the unconditional personal guarantee for the company's credit lines and lease renewals. You didn't just accept the shares. You personally pledged your house, your cars, and your entire future to back a company that is now a hollow shell." The dining room was dead silent. Even my mother completely stopped breathing. That means the angry creditors will not just go after the empty company, I explained, watching his perfect world completely collapse. They are going to go after you personally. They will go after your personal bank accounts. They will go after your luxury cars. They will go after anything of immense value you currently hold. You did not just steal my company, Joshua. You volunteered to take my garbage to the dump, and you signed an ironclad contract saying you would personally pay for the absolute privilege. Thomas's face turned a deep, alarming shade of purple. He slammed his heavy fists onto the mahogany table, causing the fine china and the crystal wine glasses to rattle violently. He stood up, towering over the table, his chest heaving with uncontrolled anger. He did not yell at Joshua or Kayla. Instead, he turned his burning rage entirely toward me. "You did this on purpose," Thomas roared, pointing a thick, shaking finger directly at my face. "You planned this entire thing. You deliberately stripped the company of its most valuable assets to leave your brother holding the bag. You set us all up." He leaned across the table, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me, just like he had done throughout my entire childhood. "You think you are so incredibly smart, with your new Delaware corporation and your sneaky little asset transfers, but you forgot exactly who you are dealing with. I have the absolute best corporate lawyers in the state on my payroll. I am going to sue you for breach of fiduciary duty," Thomas threatened, his voice booming through the penthouse. "As the former chief executive officer, you had a strict legal obligation to act in the best financial interest of that business. Transferring all the assets and lucrative client contracts to a competing firm that you personally own is a textbook violation of the law. I will have my lawyers file an emergency injunction on Monday morning. We will freeze every single bank account your new corporation holds. We will drag you through court until you are completely bankrupt and begging for mercy." I looked at my father, and then I began to laugh. I did not just chuckle. I threw my head back and let out a genuine, loud, ringing laugh that echoed off the dining room walls. It was the laugh of a woman who had spent 10 years walking on eggshells, suddenly realizing she was completely invincible. "You think you can sue me for breach of fiduciary duty, Thomas?" I asked, wiping a genuine tear of amusement from my eye. I reached into my bag and pulled out a single crisp piece of paper, placing it firmly on the table. "Oh, Thomas, you really should pay closer attention to your own email inbox. Do you remember 2 months ago?" I asked, keeping my voice conversational, like we were simply discussing the weather. "I bought you that all-expenses-paid luxury golf trip to Cabo San Lucas. I flew you out first class. I booked you the presidential suite. I even paid for your unlimited bar tab at the clubhouse." Thomas stared at me, his thick hands remaining frozen on the armrests of his chair. "You never even thanked me for that trip," I continued. "You just assumed it was your absolute right as the patriarch to reap the lavish benefits of my hard work. You spent 5 days down there, living like an absolute king, while I was back here managing a massive major project deadline. You even bragged to your country club friends that you were the true mastermind behind Apex Frontier. But I did not send you to Mexico because I felt generous. I sent you there because I needed you deeply distracted. On the 3rd day of your trip, you were playing the 14th hole overlooking the ocean," I said, perfectly recalling the timeline. "You were at least 4 margaritas deep. I know this because you posted a very blurry picture of your cocktail on your social media account, and right at that exact moment, I sent you an email. But don't think for a second that your intoxication is a legal out, Thomas. The DocuSign audit trail shows you authenticated and signed that document at 11 a.m. to full hours before you ever touched a margarita. You were stone cold sober and simply too arrogant to read the fine print." Thomas reached out with a trembling hand and slowly picked up the piece of paper. "You did not want to stop playing golf to read a boring legal document," I said, my voice dropping to a low, steady hum. "You just wanted to clear the annoying notification off your phone so you could get back to your game. So you opened the DocuSign link, you scrolled rapidly to the very bottom, and you used your thumb to digitally sign your name. Read the second paragraph out loud for the table, Thomas, I instructed. He did not speak. His jaw was clenched so tightly, I thought his teeth might shatter. Fine, I will read it for you, I said, reciting the legal clause from memory. The majority shareholder hereby explicitly authorizes the unrestricted transfer of all intellectual property and vendor contracts from Apex Frontier to Apex Global. Furthermore, the shareholder acknowledges the role of primary personal guarantor for all existing commercial obligations, effectively assuming full personal liability for all corporate debts. Thomas slowly lowered the piece of paper. The arrogant, booming patriarch who had just threatened to destroy my life was completely gone. He looked like a deflated balloon. The document in his hand was an ironclad, legally binding waiver. His own expensive corporate lawyers would take one single look at that digital signature and tell him he had absolutely no case. You gave me the keys to the castle while you were getting drunk on a golf course, I said, a cold, hard smile spreading across my face. You explicitly approved the entire asset transfer. You legally signed away your right to sue me. There will be no emergency injunction on Monday morning. There will be no massive lawsuit. You have absolutely no legal recourse. The silence in the penthouse was thick, but I was not finished. I reached into my heavy leather tote bag for the third and final time and pulled out a bright red folder. I slammed it onto the mahogany table, right on top of the useless corporate transfer documents and the mountain of debt notices. Thomas stared at it like it was a live, explosive device. This is the complete, uncensored transaction history of the secondary corporate credit card for Apex Frontier, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. The specific card you secretly demanded I issue to Joshua 2 years ago so he could, quote, entertain potential vendors. Joshua's head snapped up, the sickly gray color of his face instantly draining into a ghostly, absolute white. He knew exactly what was inside that folder. Would you like to hear how your brilliant son has been entertaining our vendors, Kimberly? I asked, looking directly at my mother. Let us review his professional executive expenses. Last March, he charged $14,000 at a VIP nightclub in Miami. In July, he initiated a direct corporate wire transfer of $35,000 to an offshore digital currency exchange. He categorized it in the accounting software as an international software licensing fees. But he used company money to buy unregulated crypto tokens that collapsed 3 days later. I flipped to the final page, and my absolute personal favorite, a $24,000 diamond necklace, purchased last Christmas. I looked directly at Kayla. She was wearing a nice watch, but she was definitely not wearing a $24,000 diamond necklace. She realized the truth at the same second I spoke it. Her eyes widened with a level of disgust that could melt solid steel. Joshua had used company money to buy expensive jewelry for another woman, while Kayla was working 7 days a week, grinding through endless showings and closings just to keep their mortgage from going into foreclosure. Kayla stood up so fast, her chair tipped backward and crashed loudly onto the hardwood floor. She did not even flinch. She stepped toward Joshua, her entire body vibrating with a terrifying, cold rage. You are a complete fraud, Joshua, she spat, her voice dangerously low. You lied to my face, Joshua. You told me those HELOC papers were for a bridge loan to fund our own real estate development, but you were actually just funneling our home equity into this hollow shell of a company to satisfy your father's ego. She violently yanked her massive diamond wedding ring off her finger and slammed it onto the mahogany table. I am filing for an emergency divorce on Monday morning, and I am aggressively pursuing full legal custody of our child, she announced. Do not try to call me. You are completely dead to me. As Kayla walked out into the freezing night, Joshua finally snapped. The arrogant golden boy who had smirked over the wine glass an hour ago completely vanished. He scrambled up from the floor, but his legs buckled. He practically crawled across the rug, closing the distance until he was directly at my feet. He grabbed the hem of my silk coat with trembling, sweaty hands. "Madison, please," he sobbed, his voice breaking into a high-pitched, pathetic wail. "Please, you have to save me. You have the money. Your new corporation has the millions. You can easily write them a check on Monday morning and make this all go away. I will step down immediately. I will sign the company back over to you. I will scrub the warehouse floors on my hands and knees. Just please pay the landlord. I cannot go to federal prison. I cannot lose everything I have." I took a deliberate step backward, ripping the hem of my coat out of his sweaty grasp. I looked down at him with pure, cold disgust. "You stopped being my family the absolute second you tried to steal my life work, Joshua," I said, my voice ringing with finality. "You wanted the heavy crown so desperately. Now you get to feel exactly how much it weighs as it snaps your neck." Exactly 1 year has passed since I walked out of that front door. They say that karma is a slow-moving train, but in my family's case, it arrived with the speed and destructive force of a massive freight locomotive. The spectacular collapse of my brother and my parents did not happen over decades. It was an immediate freefall. While the formal Chapter 7 bankruptcy process would eventually take months to finalize, the freezing of their operating accounts and the immediate seizure of the facility by the landlord meant the company was effectively dead before the first week was over. By that Monday morning, the commercial landlord executed the emergency injunction. Joshua showed up to the facility only to find private security guards standing outside the chained gates. He was handed a formal notice of asset seizure, and the entire infrastructure of the company was liquidated to cover the broken lease. Within days, the firm I built was forced into absolute Chapter 7 bankruptcy. Joshua's personal life fared even worse. Kayla filed for an emergency divorce that same morning. During the brutal discovery process, her attorneys entered the bright red folder of corporate credit card receipts into the public court record. The judge was entirely unimpressed by a man who secretly mortgaged his marital home to buy an empty company while buying diamond jewelry for another woman. Kayla walked away with 100% of their remaining equity and full legal custody of her child, leaving Joshua with nothing but visitation rights and a mountain of personal debt. Thomas and Kimberly were forced to completely drain their luxury retirement trust fund just to pay the heavy federal tax penalties and astronomical lawyer fees needed to keep Joshua out of a federal penitentiary. They had to sell their beautiful fortress just to survive the fallout. They currently live in a cramped 2-bedroom condominium on the far edge of the city. Thomas had to resign his membership at the country club, and the wealthy men he once bragged to now actively avoid eye contact with him. As for the brilliant chief executive officer himself, Joshua finally got to experience the reality of the actual working class. Last week, one of my junior managers saw him at a home improvement store. He was wearing a bright blue polyester vest with a plastic name tag, stocking heavy boxes of pipes for $15 an hour. He has a manager 10 years younger than him, barking orders over a cheap walkie-talkie. While Joshua stocks plumbing supplies, I am standing in my new corporate headquarters in the heart of Manhattan. My office features floor-to-ceiling glass windows with a panoramic view of the skyline. Just this morning, I finalized a Series A funding round for $30 million. A major venture capital firm valued my new corporation, Apex Global, at over $100 million. I am no longer just surviving. I am building an international empire on my own terms. Looking back at that Christmas dinner, I have come to realize that the greatest revenge was not the corporate trap I set. It was not the financial ruin of my parents, or watching Joshua lose his mind over the debt. Those were just consequences of their own greed. The most exquisite revenge was the quiet realization that I simply no longer care what they think of me. For 34 years, my self-worth was tethered to their conditional approval. I built a company just hoping my father would look at me with pride. But the second I walked out into that freezing night, the chain shattered. True family is not an obligation you are born into. It is a conscious choice you make every single day. If you find yourself in a similar situation, trapped by the weight of a toxic family dynamic, Remember that you do not owe your life to people who refuse to respect you. You are allowed to set ironclad boundaries. You are allowed to walk out that front door and never look back. Do not let anyone weaponize your own guilt against you. Forgiveness is not always for the other person. Sometimes it is the only way to set yourself free. I evicted them from my mind, and the profound silence they left behind is the most beautiful thing I have ever experienced. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic family member to protect your own peace? I would love to read your stories of personal triumph in the comments below. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience and setting boundaries. Thank you for watching, and remember that the best revenge is always building a successful life completely without them.